One piece of functionality that's still missing from our Conference Central app is that so far there's no way for users to register to attend a conference. Although we see the register button in the UI, it doesn't do us any good to click it because we haven't implemented the function that it calls. You're going to be adding that feature next. The process of registering for a conference involves several separate tasks, including updating the user's profile to know which conferences they have registered to attend, as well as decreasing the number of seats available for the conference. Also, what happens if there's only one seat left for the conference and several people try to register for it at the same time? Who gets it? How do we handle those potential conflicts? We're going to use transactions to ensure that all relevant entities get updated, or none of them do, and to make sure that only one person can get the very last seat at a conference. We're going to use a property called Conferences to Attend to keep track of which conferences a user will attend, and this property is going to be on the profile entity. So in the profile class, you'll need to add some things. You'll add the Conference Keys to Attend field. This property contains a list of the keys for all the conferences that the user has registered to attend. And note that it's a list of strings. You're also going to need, most likely, to fix the import. You'll also need to define the getter method for this property to return a copy of the list. And rather than a regular getter method, what you'll need instead is a method that takes a conference key and adds it to the existing list. So we're going to call that add to conference keys to attend. And this is how you'll define it. You'll add the new conference key to the existing values. You'll also need to add a method to remove a value from conference keys to attend in case a user decides to unregister from a conference. So basically the unregister from conference method simply removes the conference key from the existing values, but it needs to check first that the conference key is already in the property, and if not, throw an invalid conference key exception. I mean, basically you can't unregister from a conference that you haven't actually registered for. Then in the Conference API class, you're going to need to write the method register for conference. You can start out by copying the skeleton code for register for conference from the Lesson 4 folder and copy it into the Conference API class. Here it is, register for conference. We want this method to return true or false to indicate whether the registration was successful or not. But endpoints functions must return objects. They can't return simple data type objects such as string or long or Boolean. Use a class called wrapped Boolean instead of Boolean as a return type of the method. So the file that contains the skeleton for register for conference also contains a full implementation of the wrapped Boolean class. So here's the wrapped Boolean class. It basically has a couple of fields, result and reason. And the result is going to be the true or false, and the reason is going to be the reason for the result. And typically you'll set the reason if the result is false. We just have a constructor that takes the result and the reason. We have a constructor that just takes the result, and then we have getters for the result and the reason. That same file also includes a definition for the function getConference, which returns a conference given a string of its key. This method is used by the UI for the app to get the details to show on the page where you can register for a conference. You won't be using it in your transaction, but you'll need to have it if you want to use the UI to register for a conference. And you're going to need to fix a couple of the imports. The named class comes from javax.inject, and the not found exception comes from the server.spi.response package. So let's import that. And the getConference is provided fully implemented for you. You should be able to understand the code that it implements. So back to the code for register for conference. We need to import a couple more exceptions, and they're all in SPI response. So you're going to be implementing this code. So what you're going to do is obviously check if the user is null, and if it is, throw an unauthorized exception. Then you're going to start a transaction, and then you're going to write the code to get the conference key, get the conference entity. And if there's no conference with the given conference ID, you're going to, instead of just throwing an exception, you're going to create a new wrapped Boolean that's false, and you're going to need to set the reason to explain why it's false. And you're going to get the user's profile. You're going to check if the user already registered to attend this conference, and if they did, you're going to need to create a new wrapped Boolean, set it to false, and explain why. You're also going to need to take account of whether there's any seats left, and if not, you're again going to have to create a new wrapped Boolean and explain that there's no seats left. Then, if all the conditions are met and it's okay for the user to register for the conference, go ahead and do the registration. So you need to add the conference key to the user's conference keys to attend property. You need to decrease the number of seats available. You need to save the conference and the profile entities. And then you need to return a wrapped Boolean whose value is true, because this transaction requires a wrapped Boolean result. And then, if there were reasons why it didn't succeed, you're going to need to turn around and throw the appropriate exceptions. And then finally return the result. So one more thing to mention is that when you do go ahead and book the seats, the conference class already has a method, book seats, that just decreases the number of seats available in the conference. It's already implemented in the conference class, so you can go ahead and look at that. So all this code takes place inside of a transaction, so you're going to need to know how to write the code for a transaction in Objectify.